Hello, and welcome to another Plot Mom Roundtable. This time we're going to be talking about epic fantasy, which, who doesn't love epic fantasy? Most of us got started there, at least most of the authors I know. Except for those weird contemporary people. I love you, but I do not understand you, folks. Tonight, we have a wonderful panel of authors who I'm going to let introduce themselves. But before that, if you're in the audience and you're watching, please say hello and feel free to drop any questions or comments throughout the entire live stream. We will try to bring any of them up that I can and answer all your questions. So without further ado, Paul, take us away.
Nice. Hello, how are you? Thanks for having me on the show. So my name is PD Alleva, and I write sci-fi fantasy novels. All right, first one is out now. It's called The Rose. All right, I'll just throw that out there real quick. It's my book cover. Yeah, it's nice. And it's about alien vampires trying to subjugate the human population that get addicted to opiate blood after World War III. Volume 2 is coming out in December. I also write horror novels, and I have a new horror novel coming out October 5th called Gollum, and that takes place in the 1940s, early 1950s, and is a very demonic book that required a graphic content warning. So it's way over the top. My beta reader's like, yes, you should put it in, just to have it there. We had a big debate about that. But that's Gollum, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
So my name is Mark Stallings. I'm coming to you live from Colorado Springs, Colorado, or recorded if you're watching this after the fact. And while I'm here, I like to drink craft beer, hit local distilleries, and ride motorcycles. So I write science fiction and fantasy. I go both ways. And specifically in fantasy right now, I'm working on a genre called wuxia, which is basically magic-powered martial arts.
Cool. And sorry, I have a bad cough. My name is Ryan Cahill, and I am from Ireland, still with a bad throat, but I'm now in New Zealand. Moved into the land of Lord of the Rings about 3 weeks ago. So I'm still trying to adjust to the time schedules here. I write epic fantasy. I don't write sci-fi, but I probably will get there eventually. I just probably don't have the time to do as much research, which I think you kind of need for sci-fi, whereas fantasy, you can just make it up. So that's fine. It makes it a bit easier. And currently running a series called The Beyond and the Broken, and that's my only one at the minute.
Fantastic. Well, welcome all. For those who don't know me, I'm Allegra Pescatore. I write fantasy, science fiction, lit RPG, romance, you name it. I've probably tried it. It's probably very bad for my career, but I'm a genre-hopping mad woman. But today we're going to talk about fantasy, specifically the epic part of fantasy, of making big stories that are juicy and complex and fascinating. So my first question, actually, Mark inspired it. We were talking right before the show, and I thought it was a fabulous question, so I'm going to just launch with it. Is what inspired you to write fantasy and write epic fantasy specifically, and don't say Lord of the Rings?
I know. It's horrible. I want to say Lord of the Rings, but can I say The Hobbit?
No.
No, can't
Tolkien
say that.
Is out. Except if you say The Silmarillion and then Respect.
No.
But
no, I can't. You see, The Hobbit was the book that inspired me to write the first book I ever wrote when I was 12 years old. So that's why I have to go with The Hobbit. But Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, 100%. And especially with what's going on with the Rose series and stuff like that. That's a definite fact. And then, of course, my classic Star Wars. So you could say that too. Does that work? Or
that works.
All right, cool. I didn't know if I could use The Hobbit or not.
So for me, obviously, Hobbit was gateway drug. I went from Hobbit to D&D. It was kind of a thing. But as far as epic fantasies, for me, David Eddings, his Belgariad. I loved the diverse lands, the different representatives that he had from a variety of different cultures, and then being able to have your main character just journey all the way through and experiencing his view into each of those cultures. So he was really the one that inspired me.
Yeah, I think for me, if we're going book-wise, I'd say probably The Wheel of Time. I think for me, the epics, the word scope, I think really pins down epic. And I love the fact that in Wheel of Time, you have like you have POVs from like a singular character in one book, and you keep getting like Bale Domon, you get like a POV in book 1, a POV in book 3, 5, and he goes the whole way through the series. He's never really a main character, but it always goes back. I think those links, when you read something in book 5 and you go, that thing I read in book 2 makes sense now. That's epic fantasy to me, and I love that. That just, as soon as I read those books, I was like, I want to write that. I want to write something where someone gets like that shock and surprise when they read something in book 6,
where it has that nugget where it made you seem like you're so much smarter than you know.
Exactly.
You
But what really happened was you accidentally looked back and it just happened to work.
Yes, that is exactly how it works. It's never actually planned in advance. For me, it was absolutely His Dark Materials. It was such a formative book because, and like, I think this says a lot about just my philosophy on epic fantasy, is that I really like small human stories in the middle of these gargantuan events that are happening around. And for me, His Dark Materials, you got to see different worlds and, you know, God and demonic beings and angels and all these huge things. And yet at the core was just, you know, a girl and her demon going on an adventure. And that was just very, very formative to me.
The heart of epic fantasy.
Yes. So tell us, everyone who writes epics started somewhere with their own writing. And what was that first world, that first story that you came up with way back when? For me, it was absolutely just random, essentially rewritings of Harry Potter because I was 8 and I was a kid, and that's what you do. You write something and you change a couple names and you're like, hi, I wrote something original. But what was it for you?
What was it for me? Well, definitely that book that I wrote when I was 12 years old. And that was about the Book of the Dead. And it's these band of misfits get called into this emperor, and he charges them with finding the Book of the Dead, the book of life. And they have to go on this adventure through the woods, and they meet all these weird characters, So, and then that was my first like real gist of writing an entire novel, and actually just opening up the brain and allowing all the cookies to come out, just let the imagination completely run wild. And at 12 years old, your imagination there are no limits to the imagination, try to do that now as an adult. Put no limits on the imagination whatsoever. Just let it go. And it's the journey for me at that time. I still remember, and I wish I actually had it. I wrote it in a 5-subject notebook. So it was the experience of just allowing the imagination to go has stayed with me my entire life. And that's whenever I sit down to write a book, just let the imagination go. The words will flow. The story will come. Just sit down and actually discipline yourself to write. And there's no telling how far your imagination can go. That was my first 12-year-old The Hobbit type. And it was also a dream that I had as well. And I was like, I just had to write that book. And before that, I did exactly what he did. I would see a movie and come home and like write the whole movie or something like that, or do a fan fiction on a book that I wrote or read at that time. And I even wrote a more like a horror story, but for a second grader. I don't know if it is a horror story. So my first story that I actually remember writing was about a girl in elementary school that brings a pet hamster, to her class one day, and the hamster escapes. 10 years later, flash forward, and she comes back to the school. She's in like some teacher's aid program. And the hamster has been surviving on crayons for the last 10 years and has grown into this big, huge monster. And it's this whole like fantasy, like adventure of her trying to find where this hamster and the hamster trying to find her.
That's pretty wild.
Like 5 pages long at that point. But in my head, it just kept going and going.
That's pretty funny.
I try.
Well, and I could see how that could be horrific to a second grader,
right?
The out of control hamster,
all those destroyed crayons,
and all of the destroyed crayons, half destroyed. I mean, just picture like a field of just crayon bits.
I know.
So, you sound like you guys were born to be writers, and in 2016 is where I decided that I wanted to try to write a book. But if you talk about that first adventure, what got you thinking, hey, maybe I could do this. So I was in a D&D campaign, and I don't know if you guys have played role-playing games, but
all the time,
invariably people don't want to take notes. And so what I decided to do for this particular campaign is I wrote the notes as a tale from a very selfish perspective of my character. My character's the one who did the killing blow on the beast. My character was the one who found the secret door. My character was the one who deciphered the scroll. And so, I'm doing this, and nobody knows that I'm doing this very specific selfish viewpoint until the DM's like, okay, what happened with this? You guys have notes, so go to your notes. And everybody looks at me because they see me writing during this. And so then I read them the saga, and they all get indignant. It didn't happen like that. And the DM's like, do you guys have notes to the contrary?
No.
So that was it's just
I
hilarious.
love unreliable narrators. They give my life meaning.
I did it all. I discovered it all. I did all the heavy lifting. They were just along to carry my loot.
The last line in the story is, this whole story was a lie.
This whole story was a lie. But they couldn't prove it a lie.
What about you, Ryan?
That's fantastic. I think the first time I ever wrote anything, I was 8, and I don't think it was as in depth as Paul's. I think mine was there. I have a sword. The sword is sharp, and it was on one of those old compact computers, and it was about 6 foot deep. And I think I wrote for about 2 hours, and then got distracted by something shiny, and didn't come back to it for about 15 years. So yeah, I think it was only recently I started a new job. I'd say maybe 2 years ago, and they were only setting up, and they had no time, they had no work, they wouldn't give us anything. And I'm like, okay, this is boring. I'm going to do what I've always wanted to do. I'm going to write a book. So I sat there in work. They wouldn't give us any work. So I just opened up Word and started writing. And then about a year later, published that. And it's gone pretty well so far. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So
the good came from a bad job.
Yeah, isn't it great? So when writing an epic, people get this idea of this big spanning world and this giant adventure and high stakes. What's your personal process for creating those like enormous giant stories that are rich and deep, but not losing the personal touch and not losing the connection to the audience reading it? How do you go about that?
I write through multiple points of view. I'm also a psychologist, right? So I like multiple points of view, and I like to get into the heads of my characters. And then that to me also helps to drive the story forward. What are their intentions? What are their intentions? What makes them tick? What's their ultimate goal? Everybody in their head thinks they're the hero of the story, So what makes this person think that they're the hero, that they're right? And kind of like delve into that and keep pushing that and keep moving into that as far as character development, and then their relation into the whole of the story and the other characters that are going on in the story. And then I enjoy actually doing a lot with, all right, so there's a lot of martial arts in my book as well, but there's also magic. So in my book, The Rose, it takes place after World War III, right? So I'm not in an actual fantasy world. I'm creating this whole world, a post-dystopian, or dystopian post-World War III type of world, So I'm putting magic into it as far as like an alchemy practice. All right. So I know alchemists, and they taught me this. It's called the meditation that's called the Rose, right? So the Rose meditation is a magical form of practice that, have you ever heard of an energy vampire? If you ever heard of an energy vampire, they suck your energy out. So this meditation is specifically for that, to get rid of the energy vampire and protect yourself when energy vampires are around. So I just took that concept and created it into a magical form where people who are using the rose, their ether is here. So it's all around them, right? So, and within that ether expand, they could manipulate chemistry. They could even expand their ether. They can manipulate chemistry. They can move objects with their mind. So I kind of put some magic in there to help move the story as well. So I think the rules of the magic and how you portray it is a huge part of epic fantasy as well. What are the rules? Can anybody use this? Can it, my main character in the book had to be taught this by, a wizard who's a time traveler as well, So what are the rules, and can everybody use this magic? So obviously I have my villains using it as well. So I think I answered your question. I'm not sure. Right? So that's
close enough. Close enough for government work.
Close enough. There you go. Oh, that's not good at all, man.
Oh no, come on. So when I did the Silver Coin Saga, and that's the wuxia epic fantasy that I'm working through, what I wanted to do is to chart out a character's journey. And so I'm using the kind of the everyman and chosen one kind of tropes together to as I navigate through. And what I've done is I plotted out an 11-book arc. And so I basically said, hey, when I talked to my publisher, I was like, hey, this is the idea, the story I have. And what was really funny is I was like, this is a giant slice of bread, or giant loaf of bread, but I don't know how to slice it. I need your help on how to turn this into a series. What do I need to accomplish? And so what was very interesting with that is I set up goalposts, if you will. And so the big baddie has henchmen. And so I need to introduce my world. I've got to introduce the magic system, get the characters working within the magic, and then start building them up so that they can go after the first henchman. And then once that's what we're accomplishing in the first 3 books. And then as we go through, it's just like charting this character's journey as we explore different facets of magic and the different politics going on, because it's not just we're all in one vanilla school bus heading down the road, and as we go by, we're going to stop and jump out and get the bad guy and move on to the next one. It doesn't quite work like that. And so you have to kind of, I'm trying to do it as like we were talking about, where there's nuggets with Robert Jordan, because I'm a Robert Jordan fan up to, book 7. And then that way I can have callbacks, and I can have puzzles, and I can have things that, I introduce in book 1 or 2 that you're going to figure out in 3 or 4. That kind of a thing, having those kind of callbacks and open loops. So that way, it keeps the reader interested in things that I start here and how it progresses as it goes through the different series. So I'm just like I said, it's mostly the character's journey as I push them down the pinball machine.
I worked at an arcade for many years. Pinball machines are in fact made entirely of loops.
Exactly, loops and the environment manipulating how that ball travels. So, Ryan,
yeah, I think the key to everything for me is like that. It's characters. So I think like epic fantasy. I think, like I said earlier, the epic comes from scope. So the world is of epic scope. The story is of epic scope. Their adventure is epic, and I think it's about taking characters and really making them relatable and making that story something you want to read. I think it's all about emotion. So, when you're writing a character, I don't think this is a smart character. I go, this character thinks he's the smartest person in every room. So I try to give each of them a specific thing that they feel about themselves, like a flaw, but it has to be a specific flaw. He's not just angry. He's angry because he feels underappreciated by his father. And it never comes into the book, but it steers the way that character will act. Yeah. And I think it kind of creates relatable characters on its own. So you don't have to really think and plot out why this character is relatable. You give them specific flaws, they're really specific, nail it down to the point that it's almost irrelevant how specific it is, but it will really change how they react to things. I think for me, that's really important. I think it's really important that someone can read a book. I think the hardest thing you can ever do in a book is to make somebody cry, because that means a person is so invested in that character that they're really sad when something sad happens. I think that's how you take like an epic story. Personally, I know when I read the books, that's what I love. Is like, I know in Wheel of Time, saying up to book 7, I think is fantastic, and I think it gets better, but there is a serious slog. I know, because I lost that. I think in book 7, I think it's book 7, Path of Crown of Swords. There is an opening prologue, and the first 84 pages are the description of a room, and I think that's where it nearly lost me, because there was nothing to tie myself to. And I love the journey of Matt, where for a while he is so much of a slog. Exactly, Justin.
Exactly. I mean, it was completely a slog.
But like, I think there was a part where I can't remember which book it was in, 2 or 3, where Matt is kind of losing his mind and he's kind of gone dark and evil and he turns into this kind of character and he's just a pain to read. He's actually annoying to read, and I hated it. And then I got to the end of his journey in that small arc, and I was like, oh wow, I love this. I'm so happy he's back.
Yeah, that was book 2 where he had the dagger from Shoggoth.
Yeah, and it takes him, and I think that's what shows how great a writer Jordan is for an epic scope, is that, like for an epic fantasy in general, is that you can go book 1, yeah, you can go and you can hate this character because of what he's become and be so annoyed at him, but then love that he's back to where he is and you're invested straight away again. And I think that's, for me, when you're trying to take an epic fantasy and really bring it back to the love of reading, I think that's it for me, definitely.
Yeah, for me as well, characters make or break a story for me. Like, as much as I love the epic world building and the scope and the big battles and all of that, if I don't have those characters that I just would tear my heart out for, it doesn't work.
That's right. You got to connect with the characters, whether you
love
it or you love
character on a dragon.
Yes. Of course.
Naturally.
There you go.
So going back to kind of the roots of epic fantasy, Tolkien. Tolkien said in his prologue to Lord of the Rings, famously, that this book should not be taken as allegorical or topical. It is meant purely to entertain and to go somewhere fantastical.
Yes, allegory in all forms.
Yes. Now, of course, anyone who reads it can see see that this is a person who went through World War I, who lost people on the front lines, who was dealing with the changes in industrialization and losing the small town environment that he had been raised in. It is incredibly allegorical and topical, even if he didn't intend it to be. Do you go into writing fantasy trying to say something about the real world? Or do you write fantasy for the sake of writing fantasy and perhaps say something along the way?
Writing fantasy for the sake of writing fantasy and then say something along the way. It always develops into a theme, or, Nina Simone, it's an artist's duty to reflect the times, right? So it comes out. We live in society. It's going to come out. What we see, it's programming. We're programmed to think a certain way. We're programmed to see things in a certain way. So that is going to come into our writing because it flows through us to begin with. So it's definitely going to come in there in some way, shape, or form. There's not much getting around that in any way, shape, or form. And even if, case in point, Tolkien, right? This is not allegory, but everybody puts it on there anyway. So whether you're thinking, no, that's not what this is about, somebody is going to read your book and come up with their own belief system and opinion about what's going on with your book. So there's no getting around that. Put something good in there. Right.
So I have two. Like I have an overarching theme that, if it's from the quote from Blake of, it's easy for evil to succeed if people don't do anything about it. I'm paraphrasing here, but that's kind of the overarching theme that I'm trying to do is, and it starts in book 1, where he has a very athletic friend. I mean, the guy's going to be in the village guard. I mean, he's good looking. He's well built. He's, you think about like the high school quarterback, right? And so the main character is not. I mean, he's not that. And so, the first theme of the book is, dude, the world is mean. It's harsh, and you need to learn how to defend yourself. I mean, that's how it starts. But basically, it's that theme is going to evolve through the series. Of you got to get out there and help those that can't help themselves. I mean, so that's that overarching theme. And then in book 1 specifically, I mean, I have kind of because it's a magical academy to start, and I've got the bully trope, the rich kid asshole that picks on the village bumpkins, who end up, being more powerful in magic than this guy, that kind of a thing. And so in book 2, he gets to realize, he's actually going to have to come to terms, because I actually want a redemption arc for bullies. I don't believe that bullies are inherently evil. They're just misguided and, stuck in a moment. And so he gets his redemption arc in book 2 of he's going to be confronted with the fact that the kid that he's been picking on is actually more powerful than him and could have wiped the floor with him whenever he wanted, but he chose not to, because that's not who he is. And so it's like going to make him reevaluate his moral compass there. So, Ryan?
Yeah. No, I think personally, it's always a mix of both. I think usually allegory or anything of the form isn't always intended, but it's more what way it's taken up. So like Tolkien, obviously, like you said, like he didn't intend the allegory, but how many people are going to look at the ring as the weight of depression, and how once the weight is shared, it's easier to carry? And he might never have intended that, but it's the perfect representation of exactly what that is. And I think I know, like when I was writing, like my book, my first book, I was writing away, and I was like, I need a theme. It's like, I'm not saying anything here. And it's only afterwards when people came back to me and they're going, oh, I love how you did this and did that. And I realized that I did do it. I just didn't wholly intend it at the start. And I think it'll always be there naturally. Like if you look even at modern culture, like if you're writing epic fantasy, okay, it's almost impossible that you won't include racial diversity, because that's the scope. It's epic and it's your real world. And I think all stories drive on conflict. So they have to always. So when you have people, you'll always have conflict in race, and you'll always have conflict in gender and other things. And they'll always be there. And I think they're important that they're there, because it's how people see themselves in books, and they see the reality in books. Mm-hmm. And I know it's just one of those things. For me personally, I don't always try and put it in, but I'll see it when I write. And when I go and edit, then I might see it and I go, oh, this is something I need to tease out a bit more. And I think it's funny, because even if you intend it doesn't always come across. And even when you describe something, I think it was really funny. So one of my alpha reader, my best friend, he was reading my books, and there's a character, and this character is kind of wiry, kind of muscly and wiry, bony, with long blonde hair. And we were talking about him, and he was describing him as, redhead with broad shoulders. And it's, even when you describe something explicitly, the beauty of a book is once a person reads past that description or what you've intended, they create their own world anyway. So they're painting their own picture on top of your story. And I think that's amazing. That's right. And that, for me, that kind of changed the way I kind of went about doing it. Like, because you're going to realize that everyone's always going to take what they need from a story.
This is part of the reason why movies are always disappointing over the book. So when you read a book, you got the image in your head. Like, it is case in point. When you read that book, you're deathly afraid. Then you see the movie, and you got this big, huge spider coming out. Especially the original first movie. You're like, that's absolutely ridiculous and not scary. It's all in your head. So agreed, 100%. Agree.
Yeah, you always you read the story you want to read. When you're reading the book, you always paint your own picture. Exactly. And that's what I find so funny, is even when you go through, especially when you write epic fantasy, I find in epic fantasy, the prose most people write in is usually a lot more flowery than normal, because you're trying to create an epic scope of this magical world, and you could spend so long trying to craft the perfect picture of something, and if someone reads it and 6 seconds later they're like, I think it looks like this instead.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how that happens, and how, as you were saying, how sometimes people find things in your books that you never thought would happen. Like, I sent one of my novels to my beta readers, and one comes back and says, I love this overarching theme of sacrifice that every single one of your characters is going through. I'm just like, I didn't do that.
Yeah. Did I absolutely intended that.
That's right.
But like, I have a very different perspective, because I very much went into writing fantasy as a way to discuss specific things in a place where it didn't have all of the attached complications of discussing them in the real world. I read a lot about disability, and I wanted to talk about disability without the politics around disability in our world and things like that. But I do think that there's truth that themes just come out because we live in times, and they're going to innately move into our worlds and into the stories we tell. Which kind of leads me to the question of worlds. We write these epic worlds. How do you go about, like, we've done a whole panel here on the like origins of world building, so I don't necessarily want to get into like the nitty gritty, but how do you come up with the larger concepts? Like, is it political? Is it geographical? Like, what drives your world building for your books?
Okay. All right. So in the Rose Volume 1, it takes place, pretty much 90% of the book takes place completely in an underground medical complex where it's found that alien vampires and gray aliens are doing genetic experimentation on humans after World War III. So that book takes place there. So they didn't have to do a lot of world building. Volume 2, though, they go into the underground city. The alien vampires live in Hollow Earth theory. So I had to create this entire city, right? So what I did for that is rules and stuff like that. I researched a lot of Tesla type of concepts and put that into my world. And then it was definitely 100% political, 100%, in the alien vampires among themselves and different factions of alien vampires. You have 2 class systems, right? You have the elite alien vampires all dressed in black, and then you have these other like alien vampires that don't believe in eating humans because they're from another planet, so they don't believe in eating humans, and they're what's called the redcoats, right? So I have those 2 factions kind of battling it out in what's called Drock City or in Hollow Earth. So I definitely went a little bit on the political spectrum on that for within the alien vampire species themselves. And then of course it's connected with, I haven't gotten into the whole human thing yet, except for the band of rebels that are there, but that'll come out in later novels. But I love the test.
I cannot hear the word alien vampires enough.
Gotcha.
Yes.
I just love it. That's not a joke.
Hey, look, I originally got the idea when I was a kid from watching an episode of Buck Rogers. Did you ever hear Buck Rogers?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Yeah. There's an alien vampire. You can go find it. You'll see it. It's I think it's called, the title of the episode is Space Vampire. And this vampire in there scared the living daylights out of me as a kid. But I was like 4. Go watch them now. You'll have a great laugh. Watch it with your kids. If you got a 1-year-old, you can watch it with them. They'll laugh too.
They're all up for streaming on Peacock.
Yes, that's right. And they're making a new one too, I think. They're like doing a remake. Of course they're doing a remake.
I think it's like that word that you can make cooler by adding any other word in front of it. Alien vampire, space vampire, water vampire, forest vampire.
It's true.
Bring on the vampires. And my guys are definitely not romantic. They're very sophisticated, very highly intelligent, but they're definitely bloodthirsty. They love that opiate blood. I will say that. Can't get enough of it.
There you go. Addiction-driven vampires. There you go.
Addiction-driven vampires. Yes.
So for the Silver Coin Saga, because I write wuxia, there's this fantastical Asian flavored country that you're basically given. I mean, it's part of the kit for writing in wuxia. And so what I tried to do with mine is that I set up other cultures around it. And so I have a number of clan factions within the thing. I've got the big baddie who's like sweeping like a plague across the country. And then there's some clans that, secretly are supporting and some clans that are not. And there's some divisiveness amongst that. The clans in the middle are like, what are you guys doing? We all want to live, kind of a thing. But, by injecting, again, because Book 1's Magical Academy, I'm able to bring in instructors from different cultures and kind of, bleed in that. Like I have a Norse guy, I have a guy from Western Africa, and, things along those lines. And it's just fun to kind of play with that. I gave one guy a Southern accent. He says, y'all. It's pretty fun. But, the whole idea with creating sweeping political, like epic, putting the epic world building into this, you've got to have more than just one faction fighting the other faction. It's a little kind of light and dark. Been there, done that. Even if you look at, our beloved Tolkien, there's multiple factions within it. I mean, it's like, in Rohan, where they're like, where was Gondor? In Gondor, it's like, how come nobody's coming to help us? That kind of a thing. It's, that having various factions within there, or even stealing from Robert Jordan, of like talking about the faction from 1,000 years ago. What happened then? I mean, so we're just try to pull that in history and kind of shake it all up and create our own world.
Yeah, 100%. Like I know for me, there's always three parts for me. I think it's like time, conflict, and diversity are like three things. So like you're saying there, the faction for 1,000 years ago. So instantly when you create a time span, you create epic scope. And then when you create diversity, you create epic scope. And not just you're saying like geographically, I think is really important because you want that conflict and diversity between your geography. Because I love has to be fantasy for me because I love that escapism. That's what I always used to do is I read because I don't want to be in this world today. I want to go and see crazy things. And I think a scope is created for me. Like I love when you go somewhere and you're in a forest and then maybe your next point of view, it's snowing and then you're in mountains and then it's sunny and it creates the idea of a climate. So that instantly creates scope. And I think for me, the first port of call for me when I'm creating like an epic is the map. Not everyone loves maps. I love maps. I think it helps me nail everything down.
Totally
Because I could draw a map before I do anything else. Just create a shape and then draw rough borders, which I'll keep changing until I'm happy. And that's how you naturally create more factions. And then I'll use the geography to go, okay, well, it should be really warm down here. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to add in some crazy McMuffin that's going to make it really snowy here for ages. And then that creates something interesting. And I think I definitely I love the idea of that. I think when I'm world building, for me, it has to have those three things. I need to have a large timescape where I can give just rough dots of things that happened. So like the iceberg theory is in, and the better one I found, one that I love, so is the description. Someone said it before, is creating fantasy properly is somebody will accept the winged horse if you can explain how you put the saddle on the horse. So if you can explain how the saddle goes around the wings, they'll accept the winged horse. So for me, I think that's brilliant. And for me, like I created an underground world for my dwarves that I use because I love dwarves and they're so cool and I have to have them in. And I went, okay, so I want to use a little bit of logic inside the fantasy. It's like, where do they get light from? It's like, okay, so you're underground, you're not going to have too much airflow. I want fire to not be the common source. So instead I use bioluminescent plants. And then you go, hold on, how do you survive? Like you need vitamin D, you need your plants. So they emit the same kind of light radiation that the sun would. And kind of go a little bit, not always hard science fiction, but just add a touch of logic. The airflow comes through tunnels. And then all of a sudden, it's not that crazy to have a weird dwarven city with glowing plants. So I think that suspension of belief using little drops of logic, I think really, really help when it comes to world building.
It's very good advice and definitely true. The moment you ground something in even a modicum of realism, it just makes the whole thing pop. For me, like that diversity aspect really hits home with these like sensory details. Like I remember being in Thailand and lying on a beach and looking at the palm trees and the sand, and I'm thinking, wow, a dragon would love it here. Like you just really, really love it here. They'd like burrow into the sand and go swimming and eat fish. And of course, Thailand has a great history of dragons, so I'm not the only person who thinks so. I mean, almost every culture has one. And so the moment I started putting in, this beach in this epic fantasy and spicy food in a place that grows chili peppers, it's all these like little weird sensory details for me that I like to scatter all over. But so when we're talking about time scales, Ryan brought up, and there's this thing in epics where we are telling big stories. How do you avoid scope creep? And specifically, how do you avoid problematic scope creep? Because if you've saved the city, and then you save the kingdom, and then you save the world, like what comes next? How do you keep building up challenges that feel satisfactory without losing that sense of realism, that sense of relatability?
Don't be afraid to allow your heroes to fail. I think that's a huge one right there. People, things go wrong. Things don't go right, and most or a good amount of time, things don't go the way that you expect them to go. It keep twisting it. What's the new twist? Obviously, what's the end goal, right? So obviously, everybody wants to ride off into the sunshine, sunset and everything like that, and everything's hunky dory, and you save the castle, like you said, you save the people, you save the world, you save the universe. But I like to take it down. I like it when the bad guy kind of wins. I like it when they take. I love writing villains, right? So I'm the type of person who roots for the bad guy. I write horror novels, right? I love my villain. Hannibal Lecter is the reason why I went into psychology to begin with. As messed up as that is, not to eat people just because he's brilliant, and I loved it, So a great villain definitely drives the story. So why not, make your villain more cerebral? It's like watch The Dark Knight, right? The Joker. I don't know if I could curse on this, but he messes Gotham up big time, dude. Every time they think they have him, he comes and knocks him in the head again. And I think that's bringing it through, and obviously making it, in the epic fantasy or whatever, but making them fail and hitting them harder than they hit the villain, hitting the action hero harder than they hit the villain. I think that's what kind of drives that through, as far as especially with a major series. So.
Well, and I think, if you plan your series out right, you don't necessarily have to go, I'm going to save this person, then I'm going to save the city, then I'm going to save the country, and then I'm saving the world. Now I'm saving the soul. So you don't have to do that. I mean, a bad guy doesn't have to be more powerful than the last bad guy for you to beat him. And if you have a good character, right, as far as your main character, he can learn different things as he goes through that bad guy cycle. Right, and what you thought your ally was in the first battle, I mean, now he's trying to make a power play. So is he necessarily evil? No, not really. But does he want the power for himself? So is he necessarily stronger than the last guy? Maybe not. I mean, it all comes down to how you cast your character. What can your character learn from this next cycle? I mean, because scope creep. I mean, like classic, like Dragon Ball. I mean, everybody likes Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, right? Yeah. And the only reason why they came up with Dragon Ball Z was because they needed to increase the scope. So now you've got, now extraterrestrial creatures coming and fighting and, making it bigger. And like you said, then what? It's going to be extra dimensional creatures.
At a certain point, it just stops feeling grounded.
Yeah. And then you're going to fight yourself from an alternate reality or alternate timeline. What? Yeah. Just you can make challenges. I mean, you'll just look at like classic. I was about to say look at Supernatural because somebody mentioned it here, but up to season 5, beyond season 5, they jump the shark and start fighting God and angels and extra dimensional creatures and what. Yeah, but where it's the monster of the week, right? In the very beginning, first couple of seasons, they would have this monster of the week. We're gonna go fight a Wendigo, or we're gonna fight a like the first one leads off with some specter of a chick who was wrongfully killed, and she lures men to a bridge and kills them. That kind of a thing. I mean, so you can create a series and still have your epic without going off the hook.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It can be epic without being uber epic.
That's right. True Blood did that. It just became like, all right, this is a little too much. And I love True Blood. But,
I mean, what are we going to do? So the bad guy's a 400-year-old vampire. Now we're going to find a 600-year-old vampire. Okay, now we're going to find the 1,000-year-old vampire. I mean, it's like really
the first vampire. And then the one before that. So no, I get you. People, some people run out of ideas and what to do with the story, but bring it back down. Bring it back down to earth. I think that's the best thing you can do when writing.
Yeah, I think the best example I can think of ever is the Fast and the Furious franchise. You start off as a drag race, and now there's cars and tanks in space blowing up. Like it went from a drag racing trilogy to we don't even know what it is. It's like an action adventure and military. It's crazy. But I think for me, the best way, obviously, like you were saying, Mark, is when you're planning as well. That's your core part. You need to know where you're starting and know your escalation, and make sure you're not jumping too high too quick. But I think as well, one thing that I think can often be misunderstood are the stakes. So, like, yeah, you can escalate by going save one person, save the city, save the world, but is saving the world more, which is more important to a person? One person can be saving the world, but that might not be, those stakes might not be as high as a mother trying to save their child. So the stakes and the scope can be dependent on the person you're putting them through, the lens you look through. I think for me, that's how I like to do it. Is I think it's not always just this escalating series. It's an up and down motion, and it's what the point of view changes in epic fantasy allows you to do. Is you can have what will be an epic scope of saving the world for one character might pale in comparison to the story of, you know, a son trying to reclaim their family's honor because it's what means the most in the world to him. So that might be way more important than saving the city to him. And I think that kind of, if you can manage to do that, if you can manage to weave those bits of that scale into the stakes of the character, you don't have to keep escalating that way. And I think for me that's really, really important. I think that works really well. And that's what I try to do when I write is, if you can make it personal and you can make a person care enough about a character, then those stakes are just as important as stopping that evil rogue god.
Yep.
You want them to find that child as much as you want them to stop that bad guy. And I think, like, as well, you were saying, Paul, like with the villains, they're perfect because I think the reason they're so fun to write is because they're naturally complex. You don't have to think about why the good guy wants to save the world.
That's right.
You want to have a damn good reason why this guy is following a clearly bad, evil blood god. Like, if you want the character to make sense, there has to be logic to it, and it makes it so much more fun because you have to actually find a reason and make it, like, you know, understandable and relatable. You want to go, yeah, you know, I probably would support that blood god. He seems like a good guy. Like, he thinks well.
That's right.
If you're bent, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be logic. It could be flawed logic, but it has to make at least sense. You know, you understand why this guy goes after this obviously bad guy who all he wants to do is kill everybody, and you know you're next on the list.
But it's like, I think even Star Wars, like, it was executed very poorly in the prequels, but the logic as to why Anakin would align with the dark side makes complete sense because his scope isn't about saving the galaxy, it's about saving the one he loves. So if you wrote it down on paper, it makes a lot of sense, but when you watch it, it looks terrible because Hayden Christensen has the emotional scope of a lemon. But I think the idea of it is perfect. You go, you know, you're raised to believe the dark side are bad and everything they do is evil and they murder people, and why would you align with them? He goes, because I don't care about the world. That's not my stakes. My stakes are more important. It's the person I love, and I'll do anything for them. Like, but I think that's actually strangely the perfect example, even though the prequels are probably the most hated thing in Star Wars history.
I have a weird the reasons why I hate the prequels are very different than the reasons why most people hate the prequels. I loved all the politics. I loved all the Senate scenes. It's just the random comic relief that I couldn't stand. But no. Yes.
I couldn't stand the CGI. I wanted them to go back to what it was, you know, in the first
that's
one.
fair.
I know. That's me, though. I'm old school.
So, what do you think the most challenging thing in writing epic fantasy is for you personally or for audiences at large? Like, for me, it's plotting. Like, I've made my entire YouTube channel around plotting. I love the ability to lay out a story. And yet epic fantasy always gets me because in writing it, in writing such long stories, it changes. Like, the goals change because the characters change, and it always throws my plots for a loop, and therefore, you know, trying to plot out a series is basically impossible for me because I know it's going to shift and meander as I'm writing because I don't know how the characters are going to react to every single situation I put them in. So for you guys, what is the most challenging part?
I think it's not editing per se, but actually when the book is done, right, and just going back and saying, you know, especially in the beginning. What I do now is I actually keep a separate Word document where I keep all my notes. Hey, you need to change this, you need to change that, So at first I think I'm Superman. I could just go back. I'll remember everything. I'll remember that. No, it just don't work that way, So it's going back and making sure that I got everything right, making sure that the flow is there and it wasn't, on page 220 you said this, but on the page 300 you said this. It's completely contradictory and it doesn't make sense, and I put a lot of ancient alien theories in this book as well. There's a bunch of them in there. So if I introduce something like that, kind of like in the beginning, but towards the end, it's like, no, I introduce a new concept that completely contradicts that theory. I'm an ancient alien fan. I don't want to disappoint my fellow ancient alien fans. I need to go back there and fix it. So I think that had been the biggest challenge for me, even when I write my notes, but sometimes I can't understand my notes. Page this, and it's like I should have edited my notes on my edits or whatever. But it's going back and just making sure that you hit every single point and that the flow is there and there's no inconsistencies. That is the hardest part for me.
So for me, it's you get the next great idea. So you're plotting out a series. And you're like, okay, I have a good idea of what I want to accomplish in each one of these legs through this 11-book journey. And then, I have a conversation with Ryan, and he's talking about, the Tuatha De Danann in Irish culture. And then I'm like, wow, I could totally incorporate. And so then now you're like trying to insert this whole other cultural reference magic system into the middle of book 3. It's like, oh, no. Let's do one thing at a time. You have a plan. Stick with your plan. You don't need flaming magic swords.
No, you always need flaming magic swords.
Okay,
that is actually a requirement.
That's actually book 4, but you know what I'm saying is that you're going along, you see a new movie, and you're like, wow, that one thing I could do that, and I have my co-author for my sci-fi book. Matt, he and I joke about squirrels. I got squirrels running around, and each one of these squirrels is an idea. And how do you keep the squirrels away from your nut pile that you're trying to turn into a book right now? And that's my biggest challenge. I got lots of squirrels.
Yeah, that's and I think especially when you're writing epic fantasy, I suppose it depends how big your own world is. But I know for me, like I'll do that. I'll be like, okay, so I have a big map and I've only explored this side of it. So now these guys are going to be Greek influenced. And then I'll spend like 2 weeks coming up with their culture and trying to reference it all in and go, I don't need to do it. Probably shouldn't do it. It's probably going to kill me eventually. But, I feel that really down to the core.
We need cat people. Yeah.
Or on the same note as well, is like I have the same thing all the time. Is like, tell me a book that wouldn't be improved by a dragon or a movie. Like
or a flaming sword.
You're watching The Notebook and Ryan Gosling's there and you're ready to kiss and then a dragon just burns everything. Plot twist. The whole thing changes.
That would in fact make that movie significantly better. It is true though. A dragon will make almost everything better.
Definitely.
Everybody wants a dragon.
I think for myself, like I was saying, like so I have my book 1 there was about 140,000 words, and that was kind of the building block for everything. And then coming into my book 2, and it's 240,000 words, and it's 240,000 words, and it's gone through my alpha read stuff now, and kind of going, oh, maybe it still actually needs a bit more, which is crazy. But I think the biggest thing for me when doing it is trying to keep all those storylines, trying to make sure that the timelines align with the storylines, and trying to find out how much time to designate to each point of view. Because I think we've all been there, where you read a book with multiple points of view and you get to a point of view that you hate and you're like, oh, God damn it, I want to get to the next point of view, but I have to read this because it makes sense. So I think for me, that's one of the hardest is trying to just decide how much time to allocate to each thread. And then I know, especially if you like the way I like to write, like I said earlier, is having little bits in them that kind of weave through the whole series that kind of are storylines on their own, and they'll come into it in the end. They don't need to be there, but they make the experience so much better. And so I realized that I'd put in this scene with these characters. It was a fantastic scene. As far as I was concerned, it probably could be terrible, but I love the scene. And it was only when I finished the book, I realized that I wrote that scene and they never came back up again in that book because I was focusing on other things, and I'm kind of going, okay, I need to just put some reference in. But when they get so big, it can be really hard. Like because especially you said the editing, when you're going back, I was so intimidated started the editing because it's a damn big book, and you got to go back through and really. There's aligning, but it's just making sure that all those threads are entertaining and that each of them they weave together properly. And I think for me, with epic fantasy in particular, like with all fantasy and all books, but epic fantasy, especially multi-POV epic fantasy, it's a real challenge to do it right, to do it well.
Yeah.
Yes, I get caught up in. I have all these plot maps that are color coded by POV, and I get really caught up with like if two POV scenes are too far away, and we haven't gotten back to this character, even if they're all over other people's scenes, and we get plenty of them. I get this like compulsion to add in an unnecessary chapter just to get back into their heads, and I've really had to struggle with the like, no, it's okay if it's not even. It's okay if every character doesn't get the same amount of page time. What matters is that the story is cohesive and that the themes and the pacing are correct. And it can be a struggle writing with multiple POVs and giving them the time that they deserve because you love all of them.
You know what's really interesting? I took a look at it recently, and I keep going back to Wheel of Time just because I looked at it a lot recently. But there's a load of statistical analytical breakdowns of chapters and POVs for Wheel of Time online. People have done loads of research on it. And it's really interesting because you see the first one, and I think Rand has about 80 something % of POV chapters, of POV actual writing time. And then you can see as it goes through the books, you can see different characters getting so much more. And by book 3, he's gone from 80% down to about 15, and then jumps back up to about 60 in book 4. And like, I think it's really interesting for me because it's like a lesson in teaching yourself that you can take your favorite characters and you can minimize their own point of view in these books as long as you make sure that the scope you're given to other characters is enriching the story.
Yeah.
And like if you can successfully invest the readers into like secondhand POV, so all those characters that you didn't give it to in the first book, like they're waiting to see those POVs in the second and third book, and you really can play around with it so much.
You can.
Agreed.
Unfortunately, we are nearing the end of our hour. These always go so fast, and I say this every week, and it's always true. So before we go, I wanted to give you guys all a chance to tell our audience where they can find you. And I'd like to add in a little extra question there at the end. So we've been talking a lot about tropes all throughout this season on Plot Mom. So along with your outro, can you tell us what trope in epic fantasy you would either toss out to the wolves and never see again, or you think desperately needs a comeback and needs more attention? I'll let you guys decide whether you want to rant or rave.
Oh, are we going around the other way this time?
Yes.
Oh, we're mixing it up.
Right.
Oh, I wasn't ready.
Right.
Oh, God damn it.
That's all right. That's all right.
Okay, so trope that we either toss out or keep. Jesus, for me, I love tropes so much. Tropes are fantastic. I think one that isn't done enough is the accepting hero. And because everyone loves a reluctant hero, but like I'd like to think in my head, I love fantasy so much that if someone came to my door and handed me a sword, I'd be terrified and I would probably die really quickly. But I would take the sword and I would run because I want to be in that story. And I think I love seeing in books of someone who might be not completely like jump on it straight away, but the character who takes responsibility on their shoulders when maybe it would be against what they usually do. I love seeing that so much. It's one of my favorites. And then also, I think just the general farm boy trope will always be for me because it's not just Lord of the Rings or Pokemon. It's Pokemon is what I'm going to say, actually. It's not just Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. We go back to Pokemon, go back to like all of the cultural references when you're a child. It is all about going from nothing to something. And I think
what was Randolph Orr?
Yeah, everything. But it's always, even outside of those big examples, like it's nothing to something just means that everyone feels like they can always become something no matter where they are. And I think that's my favorite by a huge margin. Is this the part where I say like what I do?
Yes,
and where
you
I go? So yeah, my name's Ryan Cahill or Cahill if you're from America or New Zealand where I am right now, or England, and Cahill is perfectly fine. I write epic fantasy, and my debut series, The Bound and the Broken, is on Amazon and also available in illustrated hardback as well as in novella which has been doing really well recently. And my second book is due out in December this year. I actually released the numbered copies of my hardback for my novella yesterday, and they all sold out before today, which was fantastic. So that was a lovely boost. So that goes straight into editing for book 2. And you can find me on RyanCahillAuthor.com or Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, or just don't follow me on the street without prior asking. And that's me basically.
Mark.
So I love the everyman trope. You know, the guy pulled in, whether he runs screaming with the flaming sword or not. But the one that I would like to see more of is and I'm going to use air quotes here, damsel in distress. It could be a dude. I'd like to see that.
I damsel my hero in book 1, and he's damseled for almost the entirety of the book.
There's a challenge, right? You know, as my brother pointed out, if you're the one being rescued, you're not the main character.
You know, a really good one actually. Dandelion in The Witcher. He's basically a damsel in distress the whole time.
The whole time. Yeah. Absolutely. So you can find me on Amazon, Mark Stallings. I have markstallings.com. I'm Mark Stallings author on Facebook. And if you're going to Dragon Con, you can find me in America's Mart 3 in the Shadow Alley Press booth.
We think we lost our last person, right?
Moment.
Right
Yeah,
at
he
the
dropped the
moment
mic,
he could have told us all about how to buy his book. So since he's not here to do it himself, please do go search him out. He writes apparently some amazing alien vampires, and I'm all for some alien vampires, so you should find them too. And for those
right there.
Thank you guys so much for coming on tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you to the audience who has been chatting about Wheel of Time and Star Wars in the comments, and I hope you guys have had as much fun as we have. If you are new to this channel and you haven't come hung out with us before, we run a Discord server that is always hopping. We do write-ins, critique each other's work, do workshops, have a lot of fun. I'm posting a link in the chat, and I'll be posting a link in the description below as soon as we're done here. So we are going to be back on Tuesday for another indie author interview. And till then, I guess we are off the air. So again, thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, wait a second. He's back.
No.
Hi! You made it just in time.
Holy shit, that's too funny.
Well, we were just about to go, but we're gonna let you get the last word in.
Okay.
So, what's your trope,
cool.
and how do we find you?
All right, so trope. Holy shit. Sorry, I cursed. And trope is get rid of the chosen one. Please get rid of the chosen one. I'm tired. Neo, all right, Matrix 4 coming out. All right, I guess it's kind of old, but get rid of the chosen one, please. And what else? All right, so pdalleva.com right there. You can find me there. Sign up for my newsletter. I do have Gollum coming out. It's a horror novel, but I do have a Facebook group, right? I recently created this, and it's a book club. So you're not just reading my books, but I invite all the authors on here too, right? So about reading your books. So I'm creating a book club, or have created one, on Facebook. I have a major event going on for my horror novel in that Facebook group. It's called PD Alleva's Alternative Fiction Reader Group and Book Club. Find me on Facebook. You'll get free books. I'm actually doing a major event. It's going to be a lot of fun. In which case, at 9 o'clock Thursday, I'm hosting a trivia contest, right? So 6 questions. 6 questions, 6 prizes. It's going to be a lot of fun. I enjoy doing those events. Join the book club, go to the website, sign up for my mailing list, and have a great night. I'm glad I made it back. I'm like,
you made it back in the nick of time.
Just in the nick
well,
of time.
Thank you all. If you're in the audience and you're still watching, drop us a like, leave us a comment about your favorite or least favorite epic fantasy tropes, and we'll see you next time.